Good morning, Blue Jay friends, and thanks for being here. This is Blue Jays vs. Them, and I'm your host, Jerry Schwernard. If you're a returning listener, or better yet, have subscribed to this podcast on whichever podcast provider you use, thank you and welcome back. If you're new and you've just stumbled across this podcast, then thanks for joining me. If I was recommended to you, well, I want to thank both my regular listeners. Just kidding. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in today, as today is the day before the first spring training game for the 2023 season. So welcome to spring training. First of all, who's excited that spring training games are about to begin on Saturday? And what is it that you're looking forward to seeing the most? Have you been following the offseason with the trades and acquisitions they've made? I covered some of that last week, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other players that will be in spring training a little later. What new player are you most excited to see playing for the Jays? I think the big three for me are the two outfielders, Dalton Varsho and Kevin Kiermaier. Then there's Chris Bassett from the Mets. For the returning Jays, who do you think will have a breakout season? I'm looking at 2, maybe 3 players this season. Whit Merrifield, I'm excited to see him for a full season. I'm expecting him to be the full-time second baseman. I'll also be looking at Cavan Biggio. For some reason, I think he'll have a breakout year finally. And for this question, we'll come back to it at the beginning of the season. But realistically, I want to know, where do you see the Jays finishing this season in the standings? I think the consensus is they'll finish first or second in the AL East. I don't know, it's a tough call. I don't see Aaron Judge knocking him out like he did last year. I think he'll have an average season. Don't look for the Yankees to go on the same tear they did last year. A problem with the website has been pointed out, and I'm currently working with the design team to have it corrected. I may from time to time revert to radio terminology. Please forgive that. For example, I might use words like broadcast or aired instead of podcast or published. While I don't think they're wrong, I know they're not quite right either. On the very first introductory podcast, a few mentioned that the background music was a little too high. Well, last week I lowered the music, and the feedback I got was very positive. Thank you. I did download several tracks of free domain music I intend to use throughout the season. Now, on with the podcast. Well, if you're new here, this is my second episode. Everyone's new here. Okay, in this week's episode, we'll look at and discuss a brief recap from last week, non-roster invitees and minor acquisitions, what their impact might be, a look at the week ahead in the Grapefruit schedule for the Jays. We'll take a look at game lineups if they're available, broadcast schedules for Sportsnet, a short preview as to what to expect on next week's podcast, and some closing remarks to end off this one. If you read the podcast description in the space available by the podcast provider, you'll have some idea of what this podcast is and what I expect it to present in the podcast. Since this is new and I'm still learning and adapting as I go, I want to give you an idea of what I envision for this podcast and how it's shaping up. Also, provide any updates on the site or the podcast. I will stop explaining my expectations for the podcast with this episode. As for the podcast itself, once regular season begins on March 30th, which will also be a Thursday and the regular air date for the podcast. The idea is to recap the series from the week before and look ahead at the upcoming weekend series, also for the week ahead. Give a franchise record between the two teams in head-to-head matches. How they do against each other in the previous season or the current season if they've already played each other. I will try to provide a small piece of trivia about their head-to-head history. Back on February 6th, I wrote an article on my GWC Point of View blog site about the discrepancies between the home and away games. Overall, MLB owes Toronto 8 games at home. Over the course of the season, I'll go over the home and away differences for each opponent as the season plays out. I'll make some predictions for the series, provide the projected pitching matchups. I will also include the betting line whenever available. Not that I'm advocating gambling, but it is what it is. Then I'd follow up on that for the matchup on the week ahead. That's what I envisioned for the podcast and what I saw for the niche I can provide. Initially, I expected the format to be about 20 minutes long. Last week's episode was just over 10 minutes in length. So for now, let's call it a 10 to 15 minute podcast with room to grow to 20 minutes, but no longer than that. Look for new episodes every Thursday morning around 9 a.m. Eastern. The reasoning behind the schedule was that most weekend series will start on Friday, with very few starting on Thursday. And most weekday series will start on Monday or Tuesday and finish on Wednesday or Thursday. As mentioned last week, the Blue Jays signed a familiar face with right-handed pitcher Drew Hutchinson to a minor league deal. He will be invited to spring training, and I believe he'll be looking to compete for that fifth starting position. Former San Francisco Giant first baseman and DH Brandon Belt was also signed as a free agent. In addition to bringing playoff experience to the team, he's expected to be DH and will receive some playing duties at first base. Free agent right-handed pitcher Chad Green from the New York Yankees was also signed. Coming off Tommy John surgery during the offseason, Green isn't expected to join the team until midway through the season. The same goes for starter Hyun-Jin Ryu. Barring injuries to the rotation, his return may feel like a mid-season acquisition, bolstering the rotation. In an article published February 9, 2023, MLB.com writer Keegan Matheson noted some of the prospects and non-roster invitees to take note of. Right-handed pitcher Josfre Zuleta, I know I'm going to butcher that name, who started last season in Low A Dunedin. He pitched 3 games, no decisions, 12 innings, gave up 9 hits, walked 3, and struck out 23, with a 3.00 ERA and 2.05 opponent's batting average. In High A Vancouver, he pitched in 6 games, going 1 for 3 in 23 2/3 innings pitched. His ERA was 3.80 and a whip of 1.23. He made 9 starts in AA New Hampshire, pitched in 15 1/3 innings with an ERA of 4.11. Josefre also pitched 4 2/3 innings in AAA Buffalo and earned an ERA of 3.86. Although he may be looking at an MLB debut in 2023, he'll likely spend most of the season honing his craft in AAA Buffalo. Third baseman, shortstop Addison Berger spent most of his 2022 season at AAA Vancouver. He played in 69 games and 260 at-bats, 78 hits, 53 RBIs, and walked 25 times. He also struck out 76 times. Before he finished the season with the Bisons, getting into only 8 games with 31 at-bats and 11 hits. He had an OPS of 1.121 and a slugging percentage of .677 and an average of .355. While in AA New Hampshire, he averaged .313 with a .528 slugging percentage and an OPS of .912 in 47 games played and 176 at-bats. Shortstop and third base prospect Orelvis Martinez spent all of 2022 with the New Hampshire Fisher Cats. At only 21, he'll likely return to AA. He should be looking to crack the Bison's lineup this season. While with the Fisher Cats, Martinez hit .203 average in 433 at-bats in 118 games. Although he walked 40 times, he struck out 140 times. Canadian utility player Otto Lopez saw 8 games with Toronto last season. He had 9 at-bats, 6 hits for an OPS of 1.367 and a .667 slugging and average. Spending most of his time in Buffalo, he played in 91 games with 340 at-bats, 793 OPS, and a .415 slugging for 297 average. Lopez had 101 hits, walking 41 times and struck out 61 times. Listed as a shortstop, he's also played outfield. Look for him during the World Baseball Classic playing for Canada. Left-handed pitcher Ricky Tiedemann and number 1 team prospect quickly moved up from Low A to AA in 2022. He spent most of his season in High A Vancouver, posting a 2-2 record in 8 starts. Tiedemann pitched 37 2/3 innings, giving up 23 hits, striking out 54, and walking 12 for a 2.39 ERA. In only 4 starts with AA Fisher Cats, he earned a 2.45 ERA, pitching a total of 11 innings. He struck out 14 batters with only giving up 4 free passes and 5 hits. I expect him to start the season in New Hampshire, but he'll likely spend most of the 2023 in Buffalo. Now a few non-roster invitees, a couple of which I'll probably butcher their names, so bear with me. Right-handed pitcher Sam Reberse, or Sam Reberse, sorry about that, currently playing with the New Hampshire Fisher Cats, has been steadily moving up the system since late 2021. In his first professional season, he made the jump from low A to high A. Last season, he further progressed, going from Vancouver to New Hampshire. There's no reason why he won't start the season with the Fisher Cats and be promoted to AAA Buffalo sometime during the 2023 campaign. Currently with the Buffalo Bisons, right-handed pitcher Hayden Younger will be looking to get noticed by the big club this spring training. Posting a 3-2 record in his 18 appearances with 32 2/3 innings pitched, he projects as a long relief out of the bullpen. Buffalo Bison's right-handed pitcher Adrian Hernandez pitched 32 2/3 innings in 31 appearances last season. With a .496 ERA giving up 25 hits and walking 16, he shows promise with 44 strikeouts. He might need a little bit more time to develop, but exposure during spring training could help him learn where his strengths and weaknesses are. Although you're listening to a podcast about baseball, specifically the Blue Jays, you might not be completely sure about what some of the baseball stats are or what they mean or how they're calculated. Heck, there's some I'm not even sure about. Normally, this show won't go into individual stats, but I thought it might be a good idea to explain a couple each week. Kind of like when we were in gym class and the teacher asked if everyone knew how to play whatever it was. You might have thought you knew or were too embarrassed to say you didn't. Anyway, I think talking about one pitching stat and one batting stat each week will be a fun little segment. An easy one for pitching is the ERA, or earned run average. Essentially, it's the number of runs earned averaged over 9 innings. If a pitcher pitches one complete inning and allows 1 run scored, their ERA is 9. Things get a little complicated when you factor in earned runs or unearned runs. I'll touch on non-earned runs next week. For batters, the average. An easy stat, it's basically the percentage of hits per at-bats. Here's where it gets a little tricky. An official bat is not the same as a plate appearance. If a batter reaches the base on a walk, it isn't factored into an at-bat. If they sacrifice their at-bat for a play that moves the base runners up, it also doesn't count. Nor does it count if they are hit by a pitch. If a batter comes to the plate 4 times during a game, makes a hit on the first at-bat, strikes out on the second, walks in the third, and hits a sac fly, a long fly ball to the outfield resulting in an out, but runners already on base move up, he has 2 official at-bats, with 1 hit and an average of 500. Well, most of you will know those 2 basic stats. I thought it was a good place to start since they also factor in some more complex stats. As I mentioned earlier, one of the tidbits of information I will be sharing throughout the season will be the home and away discrepancies. Well, let's start now. The Jays will play 33 games during the spring training. 17 of them will be played away from TD Ballpark, 1 more than at home. Of course, all 16 home games will be televised on Sportsnet. I'll provide specific channel information throughout. The Blue Jays will start the preseason schedule on the road against Pittsburgh Pirates at Leacown Park on Saturday. A 1 o'clock game, this game will be available on Sportsnet Ontario and Sportsnet East. All games will air on the Sportsnet radio network. All the home games during the spring training will be available on Sportsnet. Depending on which games, some will be on Sportsnet 1. As we get to those games, I will tell you which ones are on which channels. Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern, they will host a split squad Yankee team. You'll be able to watch it on Sportsnet and Sportsnet Now. And on Monday, the Atlanta Braves will host the Jays. And on Tuesday, the Jays will finish off the month of February with a split squad day. Hosting the Detroit Tigers at 1 p.m. Eastern, you can watch this game on Sportsnet and Sportsnet Now. While the other squad will play the Phillies at Baycare Ballpark. Wednesday, March 1st, the Jays will be on the road to play the Baltimore Orioles at 1 p.m. Eastern. With another home game next Thursday, the Jays will face a split squad Pirates team, as this game will be played at TD Ballpark and will be available on Sportsnet and Sportsnet Now. Finishing off the week, the Jays will get their first look at the Tampa Bay Rays in Dunedin. This game will be on Sportsnet 1 and Sportsnet Now. In the next episode, I will discuss both Thursday and Friday games since they are scheduled to air after this episode airs. Well, thanks for joining me for this, the second episode of Spring Training. Again, I want to thank you for your feedback. It does help. If you're not telling me about the criticisms, I can't make this podcast better for you. No, I won't be able to correct everything, but I will work on it throughout the season. Join me next week and we'll discuss any questions and comments. a closer look at the first week of spring training, the second week of spring training, probable pitchers if available, and next week's schedule. I will still include this comment and request until I know how it applies to podcasting. Many YouTubers I follow will ask viewers to like, comment, subscribe, and share their content. Apparently, it helps the algorithm of the channel and increases visibility. I'll assume the same applies for podcasts and podcast providers. If there's any podcasters out there that know differently, please let me know. I'm hoping to build a community, a camaraderie of Blue Jay fans coming together to enhance the game experience. If you came across this podcast via social media, you can now find me almost everywhere podcasts are available. I'm working on the last few. As always, I've been your humble host, Jerry Schmernard, and you've been listening to Blue Jays versus Them. I want to thank you for spending a little bit of your time with me, and I hope you'll join me next week. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, have a wonderful rest of your day, and let's go Blue Jays. Let's go. Bye.